The Dogman that charged at me. Dear Scary Stories NYC. My family lived for generations on an estate in Wisconsin, part of which has since been donated to scientific research. Nobody from my generation wanted to live there anymore after I got charged at by an animal man bigger than I was by some margin. I was not the first person in my family to have been chased by a large feral proto-human with a head like a carnivorous dog, but I'm certain I was the last one, as we've all moved far away. Come with me back in time to the 20th century. Back then, we couldn't wait for the year 2000. We should have enjoyed what we had more instead of assuming things would get better. When I was very young, some of my first memories are of sitting around the fireplace with my grandparents, telling me stories about the monsters that lived in the woods all around us. Their generation, and to a lesser extent my parents' generation, were more like the Addams family in a sense. They were far more comfortable with having monsters that could be deadly, living free on the land they owned. Oh, don't get me wrong. When a large wolf ventured into our region and began causing havoc, some men were rounded up who searched and found the beast, bringing it to justice, I guess you might say. But when this other, more man-like kind of a wolf would run after members of the family, nothing was ever done about it. I wanted to ask why, on many occasions, as I was growing up, but each time something made me afraid to ask. It was just such an obvious part that was left out of each retelling of a sighting of the dog-headed upright werewolf. If you aren't from the Midwest, or even if you are, you might not be aware of how steeped in monster lore the region is. We were covered in woodland at one time, and that's why the logging industry here was a huge and thriving business. In the olden days, and I mean like the 19th century kind of olden days, the loggers used to tell tales of fearsome critters such as the hodag, or the hide-behind, who sort of looked like a big black dog up on its hind legs that crept along behind you until it could ambush you for reasons unknown to man. They say stories of fearsome critters were told mainly to spook the rookie lumberjacks, but I don't know about that. For instance, the loggers did tell tales of werewolf-type fearsome critters, and that was the kind that haunted my family for 3 generations. According to my grandmother Dell on my father's side, she was the first to see the Dogman, as well as the 3rd and the 5th. The creature was younger then, and it was much more active and brash in those days as well. Oh, that's another important part of this family legend. The creature seen seems to always be the same one, only each time he has aged in some way, changed from the previous experience as the years passed. The sightings grew less frequent over time, but we're talking about half a century of living with this thing, being too frightened of it to fight back, or try to capture it, or even shoo it away. Our family accepted second fiddle to this animal person living on their land, without even trying to rid the grounds of the dangerous nuisance. So, when Grandma Dell and Grandpa Joe first bought this place, using a large dowry from her family back in Europe, they began to have fixtures put in throughout the forest land surrounding the grand home. There was a gazebo I saw a picture of, which didn't survive into my time. There were boards put down to make walking easier in the wetter parts of the woods, and benches were placed in areas with nice views at certain times of the day or year. But slowly, bit by bit, the family were intimidated back into the house and the immediate grounds. It took a long time, but they eventually became too afraid of the woods behind the lawn to ever venture there anymore. At first, the family noticed the vandalism. Not graffiti or anything like that, just destruction. They couldn't tell who or what was doing it, but a statue placed at one intersection of paths in the woods had been toppled and smashed. Benches kept getting knocked over, Some men were hired to plant beds of concrete under the benches, then to bolt them into the concrete. In the early days, it was presumed that it was the weather doing this, and there was no immediate alarm. It was becoming increasingly inexplicable, however. Grandma Dell told me when I was young that she was at the gazebo one afternoon by herself, sitting on one of the benches in there and reading a book. Out of the corner of her eye, she caught some movement from the woods. Hoping to get to see a rabbit or something cute, Grandma Dell stood up, and that was when the first member of my family saw the Dogman for the first time. She said he was skinny back then, but already he had a big wide chest. He stood a little taller than she did, and she was a stately woman of nearly 6 feet when wearing her boots. The animal had a head like a wolf or a German shepherd, but was perhaps a bit shaggier. He walked out of the woods on his hind legs, with a curious look on his face. As Grandma Dell watched, she said the look in the creature's eyes changed from one of curiosity to one of hunger, to one of absolute loathing. It seemed his attention was caught on her, and his pupils dilated fully. At first this made his eyes go completely black, but as the lighting shifted and changed under the tree canopy, so did the color and glow of the dog-headed upright creature's eyes. Grandma said she put her book away and stood up, intending to slowly back away from the animal man and then head home. Before she could take one step away, however, the beast dropped to all fours and charged up into the gazebo that Grandma Dell's husband had hired the best men available to design and create for her. She told me she thought that moment would be her last. She knew she could not outrun that oversized and over-intelligent wolf. Still, she did her best to run away, and as she did, she could hear the big dog, still in the gazebo, barking his head off at her. While running, she said she turned around one time to make sure she wasn't being followed, and her eyes locked onto those of the Dogman. This incensed the beast so much that his eyes almost popped out of his head, and his barking doubled in volume and tripled in anger and intensity. She didn't look back again. She just ran away from that gazebo that the wolf beast had for some reason claimed as his own. Now, that first time this happened, Grandpa Joe himself led some of his men and some neighbors around through the woods, hoping to track the beast down and dispatch it quickly. The original assumption they were going on was that it was a very large wolf. They had not believed Grandma Dell about the beast being part man or able to walk upright. The men were unsuccessful in tracking the animal down, and even the tracker they hired was confused by the entire situation. Something abnormal was going on. That was about all the men could be certain of. Grandpa began to wonder if his wife had seen something otherworldly, like a werewolf out of legends from Europe. Now, the way Grandma told the story of the next Dogman event, it started as Grandpa was taking out the garbage one night. This man was a powerful executive at the company he would eventually inherit and take over, and he was the lord of this grand estate. I find it hard to believe that in those days, Grandma Dell still had him taking his own garbage out. Nevertheless, she said that Grandpa Joe was taking out some garbage one night when he heard someone or something in the bushes. Calling out to whoever it was to show himself, Grandpa Joe was horrified when a beast bearing a distinct similarity to the one Grandma Dell had described stepped out from the darkness. It was standing upright, about the same height as old Joe. The beast had filled out a bit already, displaying a musculature superior to that of my ancestor. The way the story went in the version I heard, Grandpa decided that this was a magnificent canine. Rich people in those days wanted to own anything magnificent that they came across, so Grandpa whistled to the Dogman, He made clicking sounds and called the beast to him to see if it might be trainable. Well, the Dogman did not react in a friendly manner. He bared his teeth. He growled. His eyes flashed white and yellow and amber. Grandpa backed up slowly, and then the upright Dogman dropped to all fours and charged at my grandfather. The story was that he could feel the hot breath of the beast on the back of his neck as he ran away, and he thought his life was about to end. When my grandfather came to the base of the staircase leading to one of the house entrances, the Dogman, for some reason, stopped chasing him. From that point forward, there would be no more posses out hunting for the wolf after each new sighting. Grandpa Joe stated flatly that the creature was not capturable, nor was he killable. How he knew this without ever trying to do either, I can't be certain, but he held to this conviction as though it were the most important tenet of his belief system. Not only would he lead no hunt for the beast, but Grandpa Joe forbade the hunting of the creature on his land by anyone. The reasoning behind the ban was that the beast could defeat any group of men, and the only solution was to take defensive steps to avoid its charges and attempts at violence. When we skip ahead in time and move into my father's young adulthood, that was when he had his first of several encounters with the Wisconsin werewolf. By the way, we do think it's a Dogman, not a werewolf, but I'm using the local colloquial name for the monster. My father used to drive his own car. He never liked being chauffeured. So, one night when he came home and parked the car, he wandered into the house while going over the headlines in the afternoon newspaper that he had picked up off the lawn. They put out newspapers 2 times a day back then, but they had no cell phones. So instead of staring at his cell, Dad was deciphering news headlines as he walked toward the house, not really watching where he was going. That was when Dad told me he heard a very strange sound. At first he thought his stomach was grumbling. He thought he had borborygmi. When the sound persisted and grew louder, he was forced to actually put the newspaper down and look around at the world in front of him. And that was when he caught sight of the Dogman. The presumption is that this was the same Dogman, the family Dogman, as it were. He was much larger, according to Dad, than in any previously reported encounter. This was a far more muscular Dogman than he had been warned about. It looked like some kind of sideshow strongman, covered in dog fur, and Dad was intimidated. The creature dropped to all fours and ran at my dad, who reversed course and skittered back inside his sports car. He unlocked the door with his car keys, as people used to do in those days, and he ran inside. Once he slammed and locked the door behind him, he realized he had left the key in the door. He could not start the engine, and he could not get out of there. And that is where my father remained for over an hour, as the Dogman patrolled outside, still down on all fours, even walking quadrupedally. The creature was taller than my father. When it stood up, it had to be bigger than a polar bear. Dad sat as still as he could in the car, because each time he made any kind of significant movement, he found that Dogman's teeth slammed up against the glass window of his car inside of 1 second. The creature would not leave, and the creature would not take his eye off of him. Finally, one of the servants came out of the house in response to Dad beeping his car horn at the Dogman, who was unfazed by the loud noises. When the beast saw the servant walking out of the house, well, he chased him right back inside. It took the house's security team firing some shots over the creature's head for it to grudgingly back off. It didn't seem to be frightened by anything less than 3 or 4 armed men, and it probably had no reason to be either. My dad was furious about my grandfather's policy of nobody being allowed to hunt the Dogman down. He argued that it was the 20th century, and that creature needed to be done away with. This was an argument that lasted between the two of them for over 10 years, until my father got too old and too busy to think for himself any longer. I suppose he could have launched a Dogman hunt when his father, Grandpa Joe, passed on, but he never even discussed the possibility by that point. That was a time when there had been a lull in sightings, and I guess maybe people thought the creature had passed away or moved on. This was the time of my childhood. I loved hearing these stories, and I believed in them, or at least at night, when I heard weird sounds coming from the woods outside. As I got older, I sort of wondered about, and even doubted, the tales, however. It's a teenager's job to question everything and to be cynical, and I did my job well. I was nearing the point of not believing any of the stories at all, until I had my own Dogman experience, when my two younger sisters were there to see it as well. I was a young adult by then, and I had been away on business, but my mom passed on while I was out of town. Of course, I rushed back, and as I drove up to the house, my sisters came out to greet me. I didn't see the monster at first. I think I noticed one of my sisters seeing the beast before I knew what she was reacting to. Suddenly, both of them were screaming and pointing at something behind me, so I had to turn around and look. There, pushing two medium-sized trees apart from each other so that he could walk between, was a hair-covered bipedal beastman who had to have been 16 feet tall if he was an inch. He had a head like a Tyrannosaurus version of a wolf, and I felt my knees go wobbly. I turned around and found myself crawling on all fours to get to the house. I felt like I was going to black out, and I could barely keep my balance. I was having another one of my panic attacks, which are about the most annoying part of being me. It usually happens in a moment of crisis. This way, instead of me dealing with the crisis, I just get panicked about the crisis and I collapse in a faint to make everything far worse. Well, I didn't faint all the way this time. I was so scared that I think my body would have kept crawling back toward the house, even if I were sound asleep. I mean, that Dogman was so scary and huge that I think my body would have kept on crawling away 10 minutes after brain death. So this Dogman was as large as a neighborhood, and he smelled like the city dump. I mean, I was over here, and he was over there, but his odor was also over here with me. This was a world-class odor. This was championship caliber. In fact, maybe I wasn't even having a panic attack. Maybe I was suffocating from lack of oxygen. My sisters ran over to me, calling me all sorts of insulting names, and grabbed me under each armpit. They forced me to stand, and in the process I turned and saw the Dogman once again. It was not pursuing me down on all fours, as it had with the prior members of my family. No, it was walking over slowly, step by step, way up in the air, far over my head. I could see its panting tongue. I could see how it was drooling all over itself, and everything else, too. I could see a living mountain of fur walking toward me, and it carried as much dirt and filth with it as a real mountain would, too. That fur was so messed up and tangled, I bet there was a colony of something nesting up in there. That odor was the deepest and broadest and nastiest and most unforgiving odor I have ever experienced. I have little doubt that it was altering my consciousness and possibly melting neurons in my nervous system. Were the creature's eyes really glowing? Or was I going on some kind of a trip from just having to smell this thing? Apparently my sisters did get me back inside, but I only remember looking at that monster thing. Then I remember being inside and watching him walk away through the window. Then I remember us standing around, not knowing what to say, and then we watched Dark Shadows. I mean, life went immediately back to normal, and we were all Dark Shadows fans. This was before the VCR, so we had to watch it when it was on, and that was when it was on. But none of the three of us wanted to live in that house anymore, for obvious reasons. We ended up doing what I said earlier. The house got sold, and the Dogman's turf got donated to science. Who knows, maybe one day they'll succeed in capturing one of the creatures. Maybe these scientists will be able to tell humanity once and for all what a Dogman actually is. I hope it happens during my lifetime. I really would like to have a greater understanding of the Dogman that charged at me. Good news, everybody. CS says she's feeling better. I'm sure your kind thoughts and prayers helped her, and her lost kitty cat Tom Tom has come home too. So you see that the prayers of Dogman fans go very far, but we wouldn't go very far without the constant support of CS, one of our most valuable channel members. Her donations kept us alive through some dark times, and they keep our wheels greased even now. If you'd like to be as cool a person as CS and get the perks she receives too, then listen to our international TV spokesmongrel Henry Lee Dogman, because he's got a lot to say. Hank? Thanks, Biggie. And thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos, or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button, or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that one. It cuts off after, I think, 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.